WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. How to juggle different teams at different places in their accessibility journey, with speakers Lorna and Notsch, Senior Content Management Analyst at Sage, and Lorenzo Milani, Associate UX Specialist at Sage Publishing. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Welcome once again to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. Once more, my name is Peach Neri, and I'm a UX and accessible designer. And thank you for joining us for this session, how to juggle different teams at different places and their accessibility journey with Lorna Notsch and Lorenzo Milani. Lorna lives in Washington, D.C., so thank you for getting up so early to be with us, and has worked on digital accessibility for about 12 years. She's a trusted tester and an IAAP certified CPWA. At Sage, she works across teams and departments on digital accessibility education, testing, and accessibility documentation creation and maintenance. When not at work, Lorna enjoys exploring her city, travel, reading, and tending her many houseplants. Lorenzo is a UX specialist based in London and has been at Sage for 6 years. The bulk of his work is on digital accessibility, working with the user experience and product management teams to ensure products are designed, built, and tested with accessibility at the forefront. While his focus is on the strategic aspect of accessibility, Lorenzo is also involved in testing requirements and training. He balances this work with product analytics and information architecture. Outside of work, Lorenzo is a bass player, tennis player, and hiker. Once more, this is so relevant to me, as I'm sure to lots of people in the audience. So over to you, Lorna and Lorenzo, with your presentation.
Thank you so much. All right, Lorenzo, if you just bring our slides up.
There they are. And hi, everyone.
All right. Yes. Hello. Well, as you've been told, our presentation is how to juggle different teams at different places in their accessibility journey. We are so excited to be presenting here today at WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. Now, we have set some goals out for this session. By the end, hopefully you will be able to set an accessibility baseline for a team or product, facilitate collaboration and progress across teams, and consider your current approach to accessibility and how to best move forward. What you'll notice throughout our presentation is whether spoken or implied, we do have themes and threads that carry through, consistent things that we found have worked well across our teams and across our processes and workflows. Now, you already know all about us, so we're just going to skip that. You can use it for future reference.
Yes, thanks for the intros, and apologies for not wearing the shirt today. It was in the wash. I just realized too late. But I have been wearing it over the past few days. So we wanted to start off by going back a few years with a very brief history of accessibility at Sage Publishing. Sage is an academic publisher, published journals, books, and different materials for universities and schools. But let's rewind the clocks a bit and go back to 2013. A customer had reached out to Sage about one of our products. And what they'd done is that they'd asked a third-party evaluator to assess our product. And we were taken by surprise. The results were not pretty. Mainly, we did not know what digital accessibility was. And so lots of self-education and training of several individuals was needed and occurred over the subsequent years. So what was the result of this training? Well, at present, Sage routinely tests products for WCAG compliance. And although knowledge is still largely held by several individuals across the organization, we're trying to change that. and rather embedding the knowledge in teams, in roles, and in departments, and in the company culture. And given that we've focused a lot on our external platforms and products, our customer-facing platforms and products, we're now turning inwards and reviewing our internal systems for accessibility. And that's a whole other game as well. So why did we choose this topic? Sage creates and supports its own products in-house. We have various teams dedicated to that. But we also purchase companies and products that complement the company vision and mission. We work with third-party vendors that support Sage content. And we also utilize third-party products for internal processes. So we work with vendors that perhaps supply features or widgets that are embedded within our platforms and sites. And we also use larger third-party products to help drive the processes that then help maintain and create these customer and external facing platforms. So this all means that we have a lot of teams in different places in their accessibility journey that all need support.
So the first thing we do, whether we are bringing a product into the Sage stable, whether we are creating a product from scratch, or whether we are turning to an existing legacy product at Sage, we need to establish a baseline. And what we found is we're really trying more and more to make accessibility part of the acquisition, vendor, or product design conversation. So upfront, we have to get accessibility upfront and out there on top of mind. So if we're dealing with external vendors or an acquisition, then we request documentation and we say, you know, what accessibility documentation do you have on hand for your product? We more and more are incorporating it into contracts. So if we're contracting with an external vendor, we say, you know, accessibility really has to be part of our relationship. If we're building a product from scratch, we get it into the product requirements. Up front, we you know, you can't bolt it on, you've got to build it in. And if we're dealing with a legacy product, we also then go on to the second bullet here, which is where we commission an external review or we conduct an internal assessment. And that also happens if we do an acquisition. So once those evaluation results are available, then we can begin to discuss a remediation plan. Once we find where there may be shortcomings in a product, we're like, okay, how can we make this better? What we have found, and it may seem straightforward, but it's not always the case. It is usually the case that the less accessible the product, the more education and training the team is likely going to need on accessibility. So some of the things that we have put into place since 2013 to achieve our goals of digital accessibility at Sage, we've organized a voluntary cross-company accessibility working group, or AWG. In recent years, we've been able to work really closely with the company employee resource groups, or ERGs, and we've leveraged that combined voice to get, again, accessibility upfront, top of mind, and discussed. The AWG is also an opportunity to promote efficiencies. We know that people already often perceive accessibility as one more thing they need to do, one more thing they need to be aware of. So by having this place where people can come together to share ideas, successes, workflow ideas, their challenges they've encountered, documentation, we can promote those efficiencies so we're not having people duplicate effort. It also avoids siloing, which is something that can frequently happen at a large company especially. So we provide training and education tailored to the audience. At this point, we have a core resource library so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. We are able to put it on a different vehicle. So we have the core material to draw from, and then we customize and tweak each presentation or each education session to the specific team or department. We've also developed process mapping so that we can show where accessibility can be incorporated and should be incorporated into workflows. And we now have a user experience scorecard that incorporates WCAG criteria and accessibility maturity level for each of our products. We also encourage active Teams and Slack channels to promote ad hoc communication. What we often find is somebody may be sort of intimidated to, like come to a formal meeting or put their question out there, to a group. But if they can just slip it into a Teams chat, I'm encountering this challenge. Has anyone else encountered that? And, could you share with me your ideas? They're often more comfortable doing that, and we welcome that. We encourage that. During this education and training, it's the ideal opportunity to cite the returns on investments for accessibility because we know there are many for all users, and also the risks for launching and perpetuating inaccessible products and functionality. And one of the things we've continually had to do is we are the cheerleaders for digital accessibility at Sage. We are continually reaching out and being proactive. Keeping accessibility in all conversations. We are always persistent, but we're also always enthusiastic. We don't want to come off as, we're nagging you. We want to come off as, hey, this is a great value asset to add to your product and to the conversation. And more, we're pushing back to introduce ownership and accountability of digital accessibility. As we noted earlier, it was initially, and it still is a bit owned by a few individuals, but we're expanding that scope. And we found that once somebody has skin in the game, once they're invested and they are accountable, then they are much more likely to endorse and further digital accessibility goals.
So in order to illustrate Lorna's points and also illustrate the lessons we have learned in our journey, we've put together a few case studies with products and platforms that we've worked on and show the particular aspects of working with each and what we've learned. So we're going to start off with Epigeum, and Epigeum is a platform that develops bespoke online courses because they develop them collaboratively with universities. So Epigeum is a relative newcomer to Sage. They were purchased in March of 2023. They were a UK-based company, and I believe their team is still UK-based. The team was already aware of accessibility, but they were unsure of where to start in terms of alignment, in terms of how to address the platform and the product. So what they did is that they collaborated with the accessibility team, starting with myself and Lorna, to have the product evaluated by Tech for All, known as TFA. They are a third-party evaluator that specializes in evaluating comprehensively platforms for digital accessibility, compliance, and usability. And what they did next was fantastic. They took the evaluation and immediately focused on remediation. And the first step was dividing the issues identified between platform and content. And what we all learned from that is sometimes the lines are blurry. Sometimes they're not. An issue could specifically be related to the platform, and sometimes instead it's an editorial decision. But given them the courses were hosted on the platform, but were separate, the lines were blurry. So the main challenge here was resource allocation. Where do you allocate the accessibility resource for the platform and for the content if the issue isn't clear cut? So that's something the team was really focusing on identifying and defining from the start. The team was really proactive in seeking education and training, especially the product manager, who we now have a very close working relationship with. And he was also, and the team overall, were also proactive in exploring solutions before reaching out. So instead of handing us a list of issues and asking, how do you fix this? They would try out solutions themselves, learn how to use assistive technology, navigate their page via different means, such as via the keyboard, and then reaching out to us for sense checks and saying, well, is this how it's supposed to work? Am I being crazy? Is this the completely wrong approach? So instead of being a one-way street, it was a more of a two-way collaboration, which was great to see and something we don't always find when working with different teams. What really surprised us is that instead of bolting on the fixes, sometimes the teams went back and redesigned elements for accessibility, given that they designed courses that were pretty much complete at this point in their perspective. Instead of bolting on an accessible solution to a specific feature or a widget, they realized that it was going to be much more effective and robust to go back and say, we'll redesign that interaction for the user, or we'll get rid of it and implement something completely different, which made our job easier because we wouldn't have to suggest workarounds that would kind of work and wouldn't be robust. And so the result of all this is that for the Epigean team, they really now do consider accessibility in enhancements and just as part of business as usual. It's really become a very embedded process for them.
Our second case study is a bit of a contrast. It's Hubro. They do business simulations, and they are also based out of Europe. They were purchased by Sage in June of 2023. At that point, the team was not, excuse me, familiar with accessibility, but assessment did become part of the purchase process. So the team did know going in that when Sage purchased them, there would be an accessibility evaluation occurring to ensure that we had that baseline established. So they collaborated with Lorenzo and myself and the accessibility team in general to have the product evaluated also by Tech for All. And different from Epigeum, but it is sort of an apples and oranges. They took that evaluation and they've slowly focused on remediation. The primary challenge here was the product was built on a system that's not inherently accessible. So not only are is Epigeum product distinct from Hubro's, but they also were built on very different foundations because there wasn't that initial awareness at Hubro of digital accessibility, so they didn't know to look for a foundation that would aid them in being accessible later. It's also a very, very small team, and accessibility is nearly a single person effort. That's why we've tried to encourage more cross-team collaboration beyond that single developer. We've put individuals at Hubro in touch with others, developers and other designers at Sage to facilitate communication and conversation. You know, how did you deal with this? How would you best approach this? What code fix are you using here? And we found that to be really helpful and encouraging for them. And they're still working on making accessibility part of business as usual, but it's something they're very aware of. It's just been a slower process for them.
Next up, we have Sage Journals, which is our academic journals platform. This is a vast platform. It hosts lots of content. The peculiarity for this platform is that it is hosted on Atapon's Literatum template and platform since 2015. Atapon are a third-party provider that provide publishers with templates and platforms. And so the challenge here, but also the benefit, is that the internal Sage team works with the Atapon team. And this adds a layer of communication and scheduling alignment. Sage is not Atapon's only customer. And although Sage has a dedicated team at Atapon that focus on our relationship with them, Atapon has an organization, have multiple priorities. So it takes longer to get things through sometimes. Because thankfully, Atapon is committed to accessibility. And so the main benefit of working with them as a partner is that there's a two-way exchange. They benefit from our insights and accessibility, and we also benefit from their commitment and their insights. So there are lots of conversations, there's lots of knowledge sharing, and although the process might be a bit more formal and take a bit longer, ultimately we've seen great benefits with working with a third party for such a large platform.
Our next case study is PlanDeck, which provides metrics and analytics. So in spring of 2024, the Sage Technology Department signed an agreement with PlanDeck to deliver the metrics and analytics to assist teams in their performance goals. Accessibility at that point was not part of the pre-contract discussion. However, once I saw the presentation saying that they were, coming in to assist us in technology, I reached out to them directly and said, could we discuss the product's accessibility? Now, this was not something that was on their radar at first, but that being said, they really took up the initiative and went forward. They have since created a VPAT for their PlanDeck product, and they have committed to assessing their product against WCAG 2.2 level AA. So they went from basically 0, to 60 in a very, very short time. So the lesson here is that it's always worth asking about accessibility at any point in the conversation. So while we encourage, again, to get that baseline, to incorporate it as early and upfront as possible, that's not always the reality. That does not mean that accessibility can't come into the discussion later and that it can't have benefits, because this is definitely a case study that shows companies will take the initiative and move forward with it.
Our final case study groups together different products that Sage creates internally, from design and conception to development, testing, and launch. And these include books, courses, business cases, data sets, and more. And we've kind of grouped them together because the lessons learned are very similar. So I'm going to start with the challenges. First off is executive buy-in, specifically around accessibility. And while that depends on the product and on the specific feature being launched, we always have to advocate for accessibility, especially at the executive level. Some features might be shiny, and so we have to remind teams about the need for accessibility early on. But because there's so many different teams and so many different things being worked on, just knowing about projects and products is a challenge. There's not many of us solely focused on accessibility, so sometimes we'll miss something on the grapevine, or we'll miss something officially. And so we won't have the opportunity to be able to play that advocacy role or that design role or that consultant role for the team regarding accessibility. And this is mainly because accessibility still tends to reside with individuals and not the role or within the team. So that's something we're really working on, to decentralize the accessibility responsibility. And it's happening with across varying degrees across the company. What this leads to is siloing of accessibility information and best practices. One team might learn lessons and implement a very robust accessibility process, for example, the design phase. But another team, especially if they're across the ocean in the States or in India, for example, they might not know that process was implemented and formalized. And so they'll just go ahead and do their own thing. And a lot of time and energy could have been saved if that information hadn't been siloed. So the result of all these challenges is that sometimes the decision to descope accessibility does happen to varying degrees, and that results in bolting on rather than building in, which we're always happy to, again, assist in that bolting on. Better late than never, but we always aim for as early as possible.
So in support of the get accessibility into a product early, I'm not sure how many of you out there are familiar with Boom's curve, but it's a favorite of mine because I think it's a perfect encapsulation of the cost, the literal cost of bolting on accessibility after the launch of a product. So the graphic on this slide shows a line graph, and the x-axis is the various stages of deployment of a product, and the y-axis is the cost going up, of course. And then there's a line going up that shows the cost increase across the steps of product deployment. So if you incorporate accessibility at the requirement stage, the cost is little to none. It really is no effort. You just incorporate it like you would anything else. If you get to accessibility at the design stage, the cost is still relatively low, but it's about double what it would be at the requirement stage. Moving on to the coding stage, if you decide at that point, if you've written the requirements and you've finalized the designs and now you're coding them, but now you're like, oh, I've got to deal with accessibility, then the cost doubles again from the design stage. Moving on to testing, if somebody's testing and says, oh, was accessibility considered when you designed this product? No. Okay, I guess we have to go back and, incorporate it now. The test doubles again, or the cost doubles again from the coding stage. Finally, at deployment, if you bolt on accessibility after you've launched the product or at deployment, the cost has doubled yet again from testing. So it has grown exponentially from the cost of incorporating it at the requirement stage. And I love to share this graphic internally when individuals say, well, we just don't have the time to work on accessibility right now. And I'm always answer, well, that's fine. We're happy to work with you whenever you're ready. We'll meet you where you are. However, just so you know, it literally will cost you more in money, time, and resources to do it later than it will earlier. And if you're willing to take that cost and eat that, okay, but just, don't say we didn't tell you so. Now we've looked at the challenges and we've stressed how, we convey that there are risks and costs to not incorporating accessibility early. But there are successes. We've definitely had successes, or we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be giving this presentation and so enthusiastically. The first of those is that we've seen an increased appreciation for the efficiencies gained by building accessibility in. Boom's curve is working. The second is we've been able to build relationships within and across teams. I think you've seen that from the previous slides, that we, really try to foster that community, that relationship, that conversation, whether formal or informal, to share experiences, to share ideas, workflows, successes, challenges, etc. And it's working. We are shifting left more and more, and that's been a movement across Sage for several different initiatives. Fortunately, accessibility has been able to incorporate into that general shift left so that it's considered earlier, and obviously then it's less effort to incorporate. We are now incorporating more user testing with those with disabilities, and we are using better user experience practices in general, and those are we're always on the lookout for how to do something better to serve both our internal and our external customers. And at this point, remediation of accessibility issues is now pretty much business as usual for most Sage products. So if a customer comes to us with a concern, or if we find something in our testing, it's not a big deal anymore to address that. It's just something that's incorporated into a sprint like anything else, any other bug or technical challenge would be.
So our end goals for teams that regarding accessibility really is ownership and accountability of accessibility integration. That's what we really aspire for every team, that they own the accessibility product and they're accountable for it. And we're trying to push that goal through two approaches. The first being education. We've provided general education across the organization to really raise awareness around accessibility. And we've done that in multiple ways. Lunch and learns, for example, good way to start talking about a specific topic or an introductory topic whilst having lunch. That was possible before COVID. Now you have to bring your own lunch if you're working remotely. We've also talked about accessibility in department presentations, mainly in ways that we've succeeded in incorporating accessibility practices and in ways that products have become more accessible, and also talking about what's going to happen in the future. We will also work with the and want to work more with the employee resource groups, talk about accessible practices, both in product development, but also within the workplace. And Lorna's been writing an excellent series of articles and newsletters that get sent every so often to members of Sage across various departments, focusing on a very specific way to incorporate accessible practices, such as writing strong link language or writing effective alt text or keyboard testing, for example. We're also focusing on more specialist training, especially on training people who can then go and educate their own teams. So teaching someone to fish rather than just handing them a fish. This includes various teams, such as content creators, whether they're content creators from a more editorial perspective, or people working in CMSs, or people just creating content for the organization. We've also trained QA teams, quality assurance teams, in the why one needs to test for accessibility, and also in techniques. Yes, in the automated testing sphere, but especially in the manual testing. We've also been training developers, giving them examples of accessible components for accessible components, and also, again, training them in the why accessibility is necessary, and also training designers, whether they're user experience or user interface designers. So we always have a foundation that we bring to these training sessions, but we also try to tailor them to the team so they can start immediately applying it to their role. And it's truly heartwarming when teams request training and bring their own problems and projects that they are working on, instead of us solely having to push the training on them or asking them to participate. So we recently had an example with another team that made online courses where they had quite a large PDF remediation project ahead. And they asked us specifically to train them on PDF remediation. So we took a couple of hours and went through examples and techniques on how to also build accessible PDFs. And actually yesterday we had the proof that someone built and remediated a PDF, and it was excellent. So I can see Lorna smiling because she then tested it, and yeah, we were happy to see that the training paid off as well. The other approach to ownership and accountability is empowerment, really empowering teams to pursue accessibility work and to always embrace accessibility in their work. So education plays a very strong part in that, not just in telling you how and what to do, but also kind of demystifying some accessibility work. So promoting the notion of everyday accessibility, that you can start right now working on accessible practices. So we're always trying to make sure that accessibility work doesn't have to be intimidating. And even just simple awareness is a very effective starting point, showing how much one can do without much training, and then building from there. So we found that sessions that really embed that awareness serve off as an excellent starting point. The checklists are often seen as reductive and unnecessary, but we've also been including them in certain areas, such as the user experience scorecard that Lorna mentioned earlier. And we're using them mainly as a place to start conversations and workflow incorporation. So we have a checklist surrounding the accessibility maturity process for a team, and then we'll score a team based on that. But instead of leaving the score at that and just waiting till it improves, the expectation and what we want to do is either the team approaches us or we approach them and say, well, why didn't you tick this checkbox? Why did you score so low? And then we work with them to make sure that we can increase their score by incorporating new processes and guiding them to a more mature, accessible workflow. Another thing is that while it is mine and Lauren's jobs to review work and to consult teams on accessible practices, we really encourage them to be proactive in presenting an answer and testing things, getting into the nitty-gritty of a problem and trying to understand why and maybe what a possible solution could be to that problem. So the example I gave before about Epigeum was for us one of the best scenarios in which someone whose accessibility was not their sole focus decided to try out solutions, investigate the problems, and then come to us. The result of that was a much deeper conversation about why certain functionalities of the platform needed to be accessible and how they could be accessible, rather than us saying, you should do this and you'll pass, whether it was WCAG compliance or something else. It led to a much more meaningful conversation and a better accessibility process overall. And then finally, we're always trying to cross-pollinate teams by showing how a success in one area can be applied elsewhere. As Lorna mentioned, there's no need to reinvent the wheel, but we also want to make sure that teams are also inspired by accessibility successes. For example, internal developers have begun building a component library that really embeds accessibility. And so we really want to share that across the business, not just as oh, you can reuse this. That's an excellent lean win. But we also share it as a success story, as look how a team took it upon themselves to build an accessible component library. So that really, we find that gives lots of, inspires teams and members across the organization quite a lot.
So to wrap up, we have some recommendations and final thoughts. If you haven't got this already, mention accessibility early and mention it often. Be persistent, also enthusiastic. It does pay dividends. It can be frustrating and it can be exhausting sometimes, but it really does make a difference. We're living proof. Connected to that, don't be afraid to be proactive. As demonstrated with Plan Deck, it really does pay off to reach out to teams, to vendors, to partners. Even if they're not aware of accessibility, that doesn't mean they can't or won't embrace it. Related to that though, don't be discouraged if at first people don't hear you. It probably is because their top priority may be different from yours in the moment. You may be solely focused on accessibility, but this is something that I personally had to learn, that other people in their daily grind may have a different priority in the moment than I do. That doesn't mean that they don't care, and it doesn't mean that accessibility is something that they will ignore and never get to. It just means, again, working with them, meeting them where they are, and being flexible, adaptable, and open to what their needs are and where they are in that journey, which is basically the next bullet. Meet teams where they are. That being said, definitely reuse and adapt your resources. Don't reinvent the wheel, put it on a different vehicle, use those core resources and that library that you build up and just tweak it and customize it as needed. First and foremost, though, find and build a community, even if it's only a shared chat. If you're the only one in your company at present who's dealing with accessibility, find somebody else who's at least interested or will listen to you vent, if nothing else, and get a chat and then build that chat. And pretty soon you've got a community, and then maybe you can even get an AWG going, an accessibility working group, more formal. And then one thing that we've really tried to do here at Sage and that's beginning to take hold is we advocate to take accessibility out of the individual and into the role. Get it into job descriptions, get it into performance goals and milestones. Formalize it so that when somebody leaves a role, the accessibility knowledge, the accessibility responsibilities don't go with it. So, get it embedded as much as you can. Our last message to you, again, we're living proof. As tiring as it can be, it can also be so rewarding, and you really can do this. You can do this. Thank you for listening, and we welcome any questions you might have at this time.
The whole thing. It's frozen. Was I okay? Could you hear me before? Because it was frozen for a little bit. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on my end, but I was just saying thank you so much for sharing your experiences, but for putting such a positive slant onto it. It's just there's so many positive messages there. It was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Now we have quite a few questions. The first one is, have you had instances where some of the teams have relied on external accessibility vendors and not created their own content or experiences?
Ooh, Lorenzo, I can't think of any. We definitely have elements at Sage that have sort of done their own accessibility thing, and we've become aware of that sometimes through the grapevine, but we haven't had anyone that, maybe Talus, Lorenzo, maybe they did their own thing.
Yeah, but they focused on it, which was good. It was kind of
Yeah.
more towards that awareness. The only example I can think, well, the most recent example is things to do with ads and kind of small marketing things that in the grand scheme of things weren't that big, but were kind of implemented without considering accessibility, mainly because it was meant to be done really quickly. And so probably a whole other list of things weren't considered. We're often trying to also link accessibility to other key areas of online kind of product development, such as security,
Privacy.
web privacy, exactly. And so accessibility, for instance, some ads were like, oh, that shouldn't be there. That's clearly not accessible. And so then we've had to go back and talk to the team. And it's rarely done out of malice, or even it's more out of, oh, this needs to go out quickly. We can't consider anything because we don't have the time. And then it's usually spotted by someone who's involved on that platform, and then they'll maybe reach out to us or spot it themselves. But yeah, I'd say ads are my most recent experience of this.
But we haven't really had anybody do their own like accessibility thing. I mean, Yeah, or use accessibility. We did have I'm not going to name names. Our developers were using a functionality that claimed to be accessible and has ultimately proven to be not accessible and so that was another push to get our own private component library going that was accessible. So our experiences are limited with individual, kind of trying to do external accessibility and bring it in.
Great. Yeah. Now, there are a few more questions, and a couple of them you've actually already answered, because one is, I'm curious about the budgeting process. What is your experience in dealing with this investment planning? And you've told us how you tell everyone, yeah, you can do it later. It's going to cost you much more. So do you want to add anything to that? But I feel like this question was put before you handled that. And I feel like it was already, I was like, yeah, here's your answer.
Yeah, we work with departments we definitely work with the departments to budget in accessibility. We have matured to that point now where they are acknowledging and embracing the fact that accessibility is now something they are going to have to invest in. Literally with funds and resourcing. That was much more difficult in the beginning. I don't think if we had gotten that ping from our customer in 2013, we would have, I don't know where we'd be, but there was definitely a struggle at first to get that awareness and acknowledgement that, yeah, it's going to cost money. It's going to be an investment. That I think then sometimes what can be a sell for Sage as an academic publisher who sells to public institutions who are definitely held accountable to have accessible content is we say, look, like our customers are going to be held accountable. We're going to lose sales if we're not accessible. So then that money argument becomes a bit more, oh, this is an ROI. We do need to invest in this. So that might be an approach to take if you are serving others and you have a product, especially if your customers demand accessibility, then you can put that back and say, look, we need to be accessible. We need to literally pay for this.
Yeah, very, very good point. And it feels like there's another question that says, in your experience, what do you think are the most important KPIs to present to senior leadership or executives to continue the accessibility work? And you kind of have already given us an idea of that with this answer.
We once had a question which was, how many people are using this accessibility feature? I forget, this was a few years ago. And we thought, well, it's not really about the numbers, and it's hard to sometimes marry that accessibility work in terms of pure usage, because that tends to be a metric that is often cited. Well, how many people are using the text size widget? That was probably it. But then we said, well, how many people are using good color contrast? Everyone. So when we get asked about pure kind of, I guess, quantitative KPIs, we can provide some. And I think I saw a question about the UX scorecard. So that's one way we're trying to measure that. But often we'll start the conversation with not so much about the numbers. It's about, one, the user experience. It is also about compliance, but and it's also about the costs that would incur. So those are different, I guess, risks and opportunities that we're trying to cite that are not purely, well, how many people are going to use this? We found that doesn't translate well because it's not really about that with a lot of it, with pretty much all accessibility work. But we do get requests to quantify things because that's how a lot of decisions are made. So that's been a head scratcher for a while in terms of, well, how do we quantify this work in a way that's measurable? And I guess WCAG compliance is one, but we found that doesn't capture the entire I guess, experience, but also the work that goes into it.
Yeah. So you do use UX scorecards for accessibility.
Yeah, so that's a fairly recent thing that the UX team
Interesting.
has been implementing. And when we were talking about it, we said we definitely want to incorporate accessibility as an attribute of a product or a platform. And so the first thing was measuring WCAG compliance. But related to my point before, we thought that doesn't really capture not just the accessibility level, but the experience and also how the team surrounding that product is doing. So we came up with this accessibility maturity score and criteria to measure at what point in the accessibility journey is this team at, and is that reflected in their WCAG compliance? Because that would allow us to better address in which area the team needs to work on, whether it's content, whether it's process, whether it's anything else really, to then improve that WCAG score. Because if not, we thought, well, people are already looking at the WCAG score, so what are we adding more to this scorecard beyond a lot of other experience metrics that are included?
Okay. Great. So that's all we have time for right now. But thank you so much, Lorna and Lorenzo. It was really a wonderful presentation with so many insights on so many levels. And for anyone who wants to continue asking questions, they can find you on LinkedIn or other social medias. Just look at the profiles and you will find them. Thank you for attending. Thank you again, Lorna and Lorenzo. And if you want to continue conversation in social media, reminding you of the hashtags. Let's see if I can pronounce it. This time I'm going to slow down and say hashtag WPA 11Y day, remembering the camel case for day, and hashtag WPAD 2024. And you can go to the feedback page on 2024.wpaccessibility.day/feedback. And it can be anonymous feedback. And you can also enter to win a t-shirt, and you can go and visit the sponsors pages to grab virtual swag and win more prizes, because why not? Now, stay tuned for the next session at the top of the hour with Tina Rice, who will talk about design and implement accessible cards. Once again, I'm truly looking forward to this one as a designer. Thank you so much. See you after the break.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.